fast updates on all things prop house. What I wanted to do here is just share with the community what we've been up to for the past 6 months. The last time I gave a broad update was on the last proposal, Prop 105, through Nounstow. I proposed in late June. It passed in, I think, early July. So it's been 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, about 5, 6 months since then. So what this presentation encompasses is 5, 6 months of work on Prop House. So let's get started. All right, so like I said, in late June, I proposed. At the time, we had 80 ETH deployed through all things Prop House. We had 5+ active houses. When I say 5+, is 5 actually active, ongoing at all times. And then there's several others that maybe weren't active at the time. We had 10 funding rounds in total. Across all houses, we had 300 proposals and 2,000 votes. As of today, so that today's the 1st of December, the end of November, yesterday, we had over 700 ETH deployed. That doesn't include the UMA NFTs that have been deployed as well, which probably can count up to 100. We have some ApeCoin that's been deployed as well, and a few other NFTs that weren't counted into this calculation. We have 12+ active houses. In total, we have somewhere around 16 or 17, 4 or 5 which aren't necessarily active. We ran 90 funding rounds. We've had 2,000+ proposals and 38,000+ votes. As you can see, it's picked up quite a bit over the past 6 months. We've more or less 10x'd a bunch of our stats. Now, I wouldn't lean too much into these. I tend to think these are good for an overview, but they're mostly vanity, right? The real meat of the thing is how effective deploying all this stuff has been for the communities that used prop ups. So let's say these are half vanity a bit. So yeah, funding rounds, it's picked up quite a bit as well. The trend is positive, up and to the right, as we all like to see it. What happened here on August was we tried through, I think it was TNS, if I remember correctly, we tried using Prop House for a different format, which was basically rewarding across different categories their community or the broader nouns community. It might have been Lil Nouns. Totally correct me if I'm wrong here. And so that was the boost there, which was around 10 rounds out deployed for that purpose. So if you take those 10 away, you're at more or less 14, 12-ish. And so that kind of normalizes the trend, and you can see we're going in I think a very healthy rate given all the stuff that has happened in the markets in the past few months. Proposals, same, up and to the right. During 8, 9, and 10, August, September, and October, we had the folks from On-Chain Monkey come online. They did what they call season 1. So 5 rounds to kick off their prop house engagement, and then dropped off in November and December. They're kicking off in January for season 2. There was quite a pickup there because they're just a really, really big community, or much bigger than what we're used to, which is nouns, Lil Nouns, UMA, stuff like that. And you can see the difference better here in vote count, where clearly these 3 months did extremely well. And that's because, again, the On-Chain Monkey community is it's just really big. Across those 3 months, they did somewhere around 12 to 14K votes. So if you take those away, you're still at a healthy growth rate for all other houses as well. And then the funding amounts deployed. One interesting tidbit I'd like to highlight here is that even though every other metric is growing, these are relatively stable. So they haven't 3x, 5x, or 10x as the other metrics have, which is interesting. I'm not quite sure what to make of it just yet, but I think it's positive in that you don't need to deploy an insane amount of ETH to get engagement going. And to highlight here for months July and August, that huge bump there is due to the Nouns governance and client rounds, which were 100 each. So if you remove that, you're still at a healthy rate, which is 65 and 92. Some analysis on the actual proposals and whether or not people rugged or not. For the Nouns house yesterday, the day before, I spent a good amount of time going through the 105 proposals that were awarded through all 18-ish rounds through Nouns houses. This doesn't take into account Nouns DAO Japan, for example. But for the main house, I think the numbers are surprisingly good. I mean, for 105 proposals across 18 rounds, there was 86, 87 people or winners who went through and completed the entire proposal. 7-ish%, which was, I think, 9 proposals were still in progress. They're quite late. Through Prop House, for the most part, we haven't worked on that side of the equation, meaning we're getting pretty good at getting people to come in, getting people to propose, getting people to build, but we still haven't done much on getting people to finish. And there's quite a bit we could do there. So I think given that we haven't done anything there, seeing a quote-unquote rug rate of almost 9% is pretty damn good. I'm sure that we can do better or keep those numbers. I'd be happy if we keep those numbers in the long run. If we implement things like incentivizing finishing with either ETH or even what I'm thinking would work best is some sort of social accountability, which is something we're thinking about but haven't gotten to just yet. I'll pause here. If anybody has questions, feel free to ask them. Let me check the general.
No questions from the chat yet. I'm keeping an eye.
All right, cool. Oops.
And that bump in August was the Little Globe Awards from Little Nouns, to answer your question from earlier.
Yeah, thank you. All right, and so I think the most important slide of all, or the idea that I want to convey the most during this presentation is this here, that we're not, so Prop House does, of course, fund builders, but I think the key ingredient that makes Prop House very, very special is that it onboards builders, right? So funding is a matter of getting people to come in, and then you just give them the funds, right? Onboarding is the activation from, hey, I'm just a builder that's hanging around the community, to, hey, I proposed, and whether or not I got funded or not, I'm activated, right? I'm ready to propose. So an example would be Uptoshi, who is from Nouns on the Ground. She proposed, I think, 2-3 rounds and didn't win, right? And then got funded by NSFW, and then went on to do an on-chain proposal. The key part there, if there's a funnel here, is that Prop House got her to go from hanging out to activated to proposing. And same goes for all these folks here who I've spoken to, most of them, where a lot of them, the story that they tell me is, maybe some of them they found out about Nouns House. Some of them were just hanging out in the community. Some of them were just in crypto in general. But Prop House was the thing that got them to go from inactive to active within nouns, right? Why I highlight that is because we have a bunch of funding mechanisms within nouns, and while they do really well at funding or whatever it may be, there's a bunch of initiatives going on. I think what Prop House does really well, and I'd like to continue to focus on, is activating, going from not doing to doing, whether it be through a 1 ETH proposal or a 10 or a 20 ETH proposal, whatever that may be. We go from inactive to active. And so some of the builders that I'd like to highlight that got their start building in nouns through Prop House are Austin, who did along with Llama DAO, the pronouns client, which is a great auctions alternative client. Yitong, of course, who's doing Agora. Wiz, who's doing Federation. House of Nouns through Will, and I know there's a designer, I forget the name, excuse me for that. Mono, who's doing Nouns DAO Amigos, Neckfest, Mucho Love. Ripe did the Nouns Explorer and a bunch of other things. Darius, who's walking across the world sharing all nounish sort of things. Bulky, who's mostly active in Noundry and built this amazing pixelated Adobe Photoshop client. If you haven't checked it out, do so. Davin, who is running Nouns in Africa. We've seen a bunch of their work through Twitter, and has gone on to win several other proposals. MetaMonk, the Rat Pack, MetaMonk, and Sundaboop with Noundation, and much more. So again, the thing to highlight here is that more than funding builders, we're onboarding them, we're activating them. That's what I think Prop House is it's very well suited for. Next, so the other part of this, of course, is one, we want to be a way for Nouns to develop its own ecosystem, which with this slide, I think is pretty clear that we're achieving that goal. But more than that, Prop House has also worked pretty well to spread the meme across the broader ecosystem. So we recently this month were onboarded Meebits, and really we onboarded Apecoin DAO, which, as everyone knows, they're owners of Meebits, Bored Apes, and Punks, right? Which is a pretty big deal. We worked on that for several months and finally got it across the line. They ended their first round, I think yesterday, and they're very happy with it. And across other communities, Purple, Anada, Uma, Cryptodes, Vezelverse, Victor's here, Builder DAO, On-Chain Monkey. Maybe you've heard of these communities, maybe you haven't. The point here is that Nouns is becoming this. So when you think of Nouns, being outside of Nouns, Prop House is one thing that might come across. And as I've spoken to a lot of these folks outside of the community who are not familiar with Nouns, they tend to have this positive affinity towards Nouns because we're providing this infrastructure. We're really about the building. We're not about the hype. And I think ultimately what makes Nouns work in the long run is that it's something that's very hard to quantify, right? It's very hard to quantify attention. It's very hard to quantify feeling. But ultimately, if Nouns is to be successful, it has to be, owning the NFT has to mean something. The noggles themselves, be it if you're an owner or not of an NFT, it has to mean something. And I think through Prop House, we're achieving that because we're kind of setting the foot on what Nouns means, and what Nouns means is doing positive things, building, and not being about the hype, as unfortunately crypto has gone mainstream via that. So positive note there. Going on to just think more tangible things over the last 6 months, things that we've done via the product is the first few months, I think it took us around 3-4 months to onboard. So I talked to several designers I did several test runs. We landed Hab, who's one of the designers at Rainbow. He's done a phenomenal job. It's been a great pleasure to work with him. We redesigned 80-90% of the app, and we were able to ship it. CDT worked crazy hours to get that across the line. I don't know if you guys remember the old UI. It was pretty shitty, both at the home page and the round page. But now we have, I think, what is now a decently looking product. I think there's a lot of work to do, but we were able to get that across, and we now have a revamped UI both at the home page, house, round. We're working on the prop pages and creation of proposals, UX. We also did a lot of things that maybe aren't as visible but matter just as much, which is vote security upgrades. We held some bounties for security, meaning we wanted to prevent any sort of fraudulent voting, and through two engineers, they were able to find a few bugs, which we worked on. We also open sourced the repo, which is exciting because a few of the bigger communities that we're talking to have requested that in order to be onboarded, they need to be able to look at the code and what's going on. So that's important. And another big one that we were able to ship thanks to the great dev carrot is we shipped the GraphQL interface, basically opening up all our data. And while that is not maybe as evident from the outside, I think it's more than anything hints at how powerful the protocol will be, because once those APIs are standardized at the protocol level, anybody will be able to build anything. So some examples of that, if you want to check it out, voters.wtf by Danny, I think is live. It functions on Prophouse data. Did an incredible job there. Nouns Atlas by Brian is a search engine for all things Nounish that got started due to the Prophouse hackathon, which is, again, thanks to the open data. So overall, I think the product is doing really well. We've done a lot of work. There's an infinite amount of work still to be done, but I am happy with what we've been able to accomplish over the past 5-6 months. Then the protocol, I think this is what most, at least dev people, are interested in. Where we are today, we were able to ship the protocol to testnet, so it's on Goerli. This is all thanks to the great Charlie, who basically took this on and has done, if not all, 90% of or 95% of all this work. So he built the protocol. It functions with L1 Ethereum, L2 Starknet. L2 will handle proposal and voting, and security will be handled by Ethereum. We've also developed the Prophouse SDK, which is going to allow you to interact with these, and also the Starknet relayer, which is what allows you to communicate with L2. These are also being tested. And finally, we are developing Starknet and Ethereum subgraphs in order to have that data readily available for developers to pull it and play with it and build whatever they want. And as far as blockers, we're waiting on the Cairo V1 migration. That is expected to ship next month. Once we finalize testing of the protocol, we need to run the audits, of course. And then lastly, we're waiting on support for V1 on Starknet, which is expected within the next 4 months, so Q1 of 2023. Next is financials. We've, of course, been funded by Nouns DAO. The work started in January of rather the first proposal was in December of January of 2021. Sorry, January of 2022. So it's been an entire year of development. First proposal was basically, hey, let's run an MVP. Dev Carrot, Toasty, and I built it and shipped it. And since then, we've gotten 2 more proposals, which in total have been 555 ETH allocated towards funding rounds, basically just pushing ETH back to builders within the Nouns ecosystem, and close to 700 in development costs and expenses. This is to pay the team, which is 1 designer and 5-6 engineers across backend, front end, product, and of course the protocol. And how we spent that is, here's the distribution. Again, this is for an entire year of work. For contributors, meaning the team, 1 designer, 5-6 engineers, we've streamed a total of 510 ETH. For funding rounds, we've deployed 288 ETH through the Nouns houses, Nouns DAO Japan. That's the bulk of it, 95% of it. Miscellaneous expenses, 17 ETH, which are mostly to pay security audits and help Nouns DAO Japan get started. And then the remaining ETH that we still have in the safe is 336 ETH in the safe, 10 plus 10 which belong to Cryptodes for their house, and 98 ETH which has been deposited to Saber streams, which are to be streamed for the rest of the month. And so, kind of wrapping this all up, what's next? Well, the big thing is to go from where we are today, centralized, meaning we host the front end and we own the back end, to decentralized, where we have the front end as a team, and we have, for the data layer, we have Starknet and Ethereum. At that point, I think the really interesting thing is, one, I think more trust. So anybody can do this. It's frictionless. Anybody will be able to deploy a house around, whether it be 1,000 ETH house or a 0.5 ETH house or an NFT house, whatever it may be. I think what we're going to see there is just 100x the experimentation, given the constraints of the protocol, and I'm sure we'll find some really interesting outcomes from there. And beyond that, what else is next beyond the meat part of it, which is going to the protocol, is we don't have sustainability. We haven't made any revenue from all the work, but of course I think the value that Nouns has accrued from our work, personally, I think it far exceeds the work that we've done, or rather the cost of the work that we've done. So we will be proposing to just continue development both on the protocol end and the front end. Of course, launching the protocol, continuing to develop the UX. While we're at a decent stage with the product, I think the core UX still has a lot of work to be done, which is proposing, making it easy making it easier to propose, but most importantly to include rich media, so that Prop House isn't walls of text, but rather photos and videos. Discovery goes along with the rich media. We want Prop House to be funner. Like, if we can achieve a feeling of, hey, this is fun to do, this is fun to propose, this is fun to vote, I think we'll be at a pretty good point. I think we achieved that today, but it needs to be more. It needs to feel more playful for this thing to actually pick up some real steam beyond crypto. And lastly, voting. I think we've done a good job there, but we'll be shipping out some things in the next, if not this week, next week, that improves that UX a lot. We've we're finishing up the house and round manager UI, which is essentially the way that people will be able to create houses and deploy rounds by themselves without having to talk to the prop house team. And then transitioning to the protocol data layer, which means once the protocol is shipped, we're going to have to shift the entire product from sourcing all its data from our database to the protocol as well. Other things that are in the back of my mind at all times is round strategies at client and protocol level. One thing that we've been working on is the infinite rounds, which essentially would make it easier for grants programs to run their stuff on prop house. I think there's a big opportunity there, and we really want to nail that UX. So that's in the works, both currently on database centralized version of prop house, but it's also something that is being actively developed on the protocol end. So ideally, we ship the protocol not only with the current round, which is a timed round, but also with the infinite rounds, which allows for more granular deployment of funds by subset of people as opposed to larger communities. And then lastly, I think the big question both within prop house and beyond is how do you monetize? Do you need a DAO for these things? Do all protocols need DAOs? If you do go with the DAO, are you eventually going to see stakeholders try to capture as much upside by turning on fees? There's a lot of questions there. I'm actively thinking about this. I don't have answers just yet. I do have a sense of where they should go. But more than anything, I think the important thing is that we build something that people use more than anything. That's the North Star, and that can be sustained across not just us, the team, but 5-10 years down the line. It's something it's a system that we built that can sustain itself and grow. So that's the presentation I had for you guys. If anybody has, that's a lot of people. If anybody has questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
Seneca, there was one question in the chat. EOJ had to bounce, but he had a question before he left about infinite rounds, and just wondering if the development of that is going to be shipped near or midterm as they're thinking about using it for DCS.
Yeah, so I can't say it's going to be shipped within a few weeks. As all things development, it's you think you can take care of it in a month or so, but as soon as you start coding, you see that it's there's a lot more to do. And I think at this point, given that we know what we want to build, I'd rather ship something that's polished as opposed to something, I don't want to say half-assed, but that is missing critical features. So the answer to that is I don't think we can ship it this month in December, but January, February looks likely. I think that's more accurate than saying it's going out today or this month.
So far, that's the only question from chat.
All right.
I've got a question.
Go ahead, one.
Please, one.
First off, did I miss the POAP?
No POAPs.
No
POAPs yet.
No. When you talk about the decentralized, like moving to that decentralized layer with the Starknet and Ethereum backend, do you see other building front end like forks, like clients? Like, I'm curious that like creator contest or I forget what the tool that Nick's building.
From Seneca?
Yeah, yeah, it's got a name. It starts with a C.
Creator contests.
I think it is creator contest.
Oh, okay. So that's more of like it's a copy, right? A fork per se. It's not using the same backend, right? But do you see more like forks that use the same backend layer, or kind of how do you see that in terms of like as all multiple prop houses start popping up everywhere?
Right. So
But it has to be
completely
over though.
let's see. I think so, the benefits of going to the protocol layer, I think first and foremost is to make the whole thing trustless and frictionless, right? So allow people, anybody, without having to talk to Seneca or Chody or whoever, to run what we know works already. I think that's really important before getting ahead of ourselves and thinking that all these magical things will happen, which I do think will happen, but first and foremost is making it frictionless, making the data available for anybody of what we have today. As for what can happen, given that everything would be open, I do think that we'll see maybe not forks per se, but other ways to interact with the protocol that aren't that prop house the product isn't handling exactly how somebody would want. So given that I think experimentation will go 100x, right, or at least 10x, we're gonna see use cases that we never thought of, right? And that might just be things that are very specific. So a front end that only allows for median, for an image, right? So a contest that is only an image, that sort of thing. While we do, it's more or less within our range of what we can do. I do think that very specific use cases will come up, and builders, because they can do it now, they will go ahead and build on that. An aside is talking about the protocol and sustainability and whatnot. I think one idea I have for how this can evolve is incentivizing protocol development. And when I say protocol development, I don't mean necessarily the entire system, but rather specific strategies. And then maybe if you do deploy that strategy, right? When I talk about strategy, I'm talking about the timed rounds that we all know today, but another strategy would be infinite rounds. So if you come up with an idea for a strategy and it works, maybe you can grab a fee from anybody that uses that strategy for the first year or so. So maybe my answer to the question is, I do think there'll be all types of weird stuff that we've never thought of before, mainly new use cases. And given that the protocol would be available, I think we're just going to go in a whole bunch of directions that I wouldn't be able to tell right now, just because I haven't thought of them. Also, additionally, with straight forks, I think bigger communities will probably want maybe to fork and brand it as their own. Although, there's something to be said for the team actively developing the product, the prop house product. So, yeah, does that more or less answer your question? If not, please.
Yeah.
I'll try to be more to the point.
No, that's and my question might have been jumbled, but you answered. Yeah, I think it's a combination of will there be forks or copies or just different front end clients that tap into the same back end. So that's exciting. No, thanks, I appreciate it.
I think so. To just double on that, like I do think we will see different clients, and ultimately that's good for everybody, right? Because there's competition, and so.
Yeah, agreed.
If there's competition, better products are developed. So one thing with regards to sustainability, I tend to think that incentivizing, so similar to how in Uniswap you get a fee by providing liquidity, I tend to think that the way to go is being able to capture a fee for getting both sides of the market together, meaning proposers and voters. I'd much rather see that because there's a clear incentive to develop all sorts of products around the protocol, as opposed to, I don't know, like I don't want to say useless governance token, but a governance token that is not is not clear on what its final purpose is.
Yeah. There's a joke in there about redundancy.
Right. Yeah. So a note on the token. I think for nouns it works extremely well because it's a meme, right? When you talk about products that need utility, I think you tend to go on to the other side, which is where is the utility? And for token holders, it's mostly money, right? So you see that in Uniswap, for example, where they're not proliferating a meme. They're a governance token, and since the underlying is a utility-based system, what everybody's pushing there is a fee. And whether it makes sense or not, it probably does. I think there's cases to be made on both sides, but at least the lesson I'm taking from seeing this across DeFi and other ecosystems is it's important to be very intentional and very well thought out on releasing a token, because a lot of the times it just feels like an ICO, to be honest. It feels like a money grab without a very real purpose. So, yeah, that's it. I could be entirely wrong, and there's also something to be said that, hey, you are proliferating the meme itself, right? Like the prop house meme. And so if you frame it in that direction, which is a carbon copy of what Nouns is doing, then maybe it works. But I'm not sure if, I don't know. This is why I haven't settled on anything just yet, because I think there's a lot to think through, a lot of experiments that are being run right now that will help us come to some sort of conclusion here.
Seneca, hindsight had a question in the chat. Why not a small percentage of funding going to the protocol?
So, funding as in, hindsight, are you there? Do you mean funding as in the funding that's going through the rounds?
He's typing, so I'll let you know what he says. I guess he can't speak.
Where are you seeing this? I don't see anything in general.
So when you're in the voice chat on the top right, there's a little bubble. That's where most people have been putting their questions.
The worst UX.
It's not great.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, I'm seeing some. Yeah, I mean, if you kick back a fee to the protocol itself, I guess what you're referring to is, hey, there's governance holders who, if they do a good job, then the protocol does well, and then they get a fee back into the protocol, so the treasury is there, and you could sort of fund more things. Prop house.
Yeah, so I have a number of admin stuff. Got to get a couple of documents out.
Whoa, was that hindsight?
No, it wasn't hindsight. I don't know who it was, though. I can't see anyone unmuted. That's weird. Oh, it's Yutong. Okay.
Okay, so I'll try to answer the question. You could. So my thing with that is that fees should be accrued to people that are doing the work. It's fine, no worries with the voice. In a similar way that liquidity providers earn a fee because they're providing liquidity. Bitcoin miners get a fee for securing the network. Stakers get a fee for securing the network. I think, to me, that model seems sensible, right? Where if you do work, you get a fee back, right? And in that case, the protocol at its inactive state, just being the protocol, is not doing any work. The work is being done by the product people who are developing a product actively years on end to capture people to come in and do something, right? And so I think that's the work that should be first and foremost compensated, right? I do think like you could make a case where governance holders are doing some sort of work because they're governing, but that's sort of a few steps away from the actual work, right? I read two books twice to get some ideas on how to approach this, which was Working in Public and The Cathedral and the Bazaar. I think I'm saying that correctly, maybe not. And one distinction they made, which I thought was really insightful, is that there's open source software has two states. One is the sort of inactive state where you publish some code and then people can use it, right? That has a marginal cost of zero, right? I publish the protocol and that's it. It's running. I don't have to do anything. But then there's the active state, which is the one that actually incurs most of the cost, which is maintaining an open source repo is a shit ton of work, right? That sort of active state, I think, is what should be compensated within these sorts of systems. Now, all that said, I do think just as much as anybody else, I want for the protocol to be able to compensate the initial builders, right? Like I would like to do well thanks to, myself and the team and Nouns do well because we built this thing. But if that means tacking on what might feel like a governance token that I don't know how much governing you're doing with this product, I'd rather not and just do something else. But, again, this is something that needs a lot of thinking through. And I would just like time to, I don't think there's any rush to bet the farm on any specific approach just yet. Yeah, I suppose that there's a protocol fee. Yeah, I think like the protocol fee might even makes us like one another way for founders to be compensated for the stuff that they did, right? Is given that it becomes you can't sort of extract rent because I did this one thing 5 years ago and I still make money 10 years down the line without actively doing any work. So one option might be, or one idea I had recently was, what if you turn on a fee for a set amount of time, similar to how nouners are taking a noun for a set amount of time, right? And that sort of incentivizes at least the founding team to continue development and make sure the thing becomes an ecosystem that is alive and well, right? Once you get into the nuances of the product protocol, actually getting marketplaces going, the distinction between centralized and decentralized and open source and closed source for profit companies, it definitely is a transition, right? Like there's no way any of this works without, at least this is my belief, I don't think any of this works without a very focused set of people doing very focused work to make sure that the thing at least gets its footing right? I think from experience with Nouns, the amount of work that it took to get here, although there's obviously a lot of community members that a lot of community members and Nouners have done a lot of work, but it's very clear to me that you needed to be there and help in the Discord and help the builders and do a lot of work that isn't necessarily tangible to get the protocol or the community to where it's at. It's similar with any other protocol, Prop House, for example. there needs to be. I mean, so far we've done a whole year of work, right? So I don't know. I'm rambling a bit, but I'm trying to be very thoughtful of how to do this. Anyways, hindsight. I hope that helps answer your question. If anybody else has questions, they can be really technical. We have Solly here, who is who essentially developed the entire thing on its own. So if you have questions there, feel free to ask. Yeah. Can you guys see my screen? I hope I'm not doxing myself.
We can just only see the slides.
Oh, cool. All right, cool. Yeah. Anybody questions, concerns?
Just a general request. Everything. There's a lot of great stuff happening here, and I think you have a lot of support. Just because the public momentum and enthusiasm is pretty clear. I would like to see kind of an end goal regarding noun style funding. It sounds like you're going to put another ask for further development, and in those, I'd just like to kind of understand when there will be a model of kind of self-sustaining funding in the future of some kind. What does that look like? I guess, what does the 1 to 3 year timeline look like for Propos funding?
Yeah, so I think I'll answer that in twofold. One is so far for development, we've consumed from contributors 500 ETH, miscellaneous expenses 17. There's 98 to be streamed still, so more or less 600 to 700 ETH for contributors. The rest are either still in the safe or have been pushed to the community. So I think the clearest case I can make to continue funding Prop House is simply asking, as an owner, asking yourself, has funding these developers for this year at 700 ETH produce more value than the cost? I think that the answer, at least to me, is pretty clear. So that's a case to be made for the protocol. But I understand your question is more about sustainability. So a few things I'll say there. One of the biggest question for me is indeed that is how do you make the entire thing sustainable on its own? The just obvious go-to, without trying to experiment too much, so things that I think just work because they work, is launch a protocol, grab a fee at the client level, and then the whole thing becomes like competing for attention to use the protocol itself, right? Similar to how, I don't know, Uniswap is a protocol, but Uniswap, the company, is running the front end where they, the liquidity providers are grabbing the fee. But in our case, we, the client, or the product developers, are providing the liquidity, quote unquote, so they grab the fee. So I think that's the most obvious go-to. There's other things that could be approached. So the one that I was initially thinking of is just having a nounish DAO for Prop House, right? Where you auction one Prop House noun a day, and then the funds are used by governance, by the stakeholders. So that's another approach. But while I initially thought that was the most, the best move, I don't think so anymore, because again, with the distinction between meme and utility. So, I mean, to answer your question, the obvious is just grab a fee at the client level and basically run a company that is for profit and that is, it maintains itself off of those fees. It's a tough sell because we've deployed 700 ETH, and at a 1%, if you grab 1% fees, you talk about 7 ETH, right? If you talk about 2%, 14 ETH, it's not. We're not to get to a scale where you can sustain this sort of development. You need a lot of more volume, right? And then the alternative, hey, just go VC route, right? Like raise a bunch of money. But then personally, I'm not too fond of it just because then you're expected to make $100 billion company. I'm exaggerating, but you're supposed to make 1,000x, 100x. And there's this crazy pressure that comes with it that, just takes the nowish feeling away. So sustainability, like there's the product that I mentioned, grabbing a fee there. But the first point I think is important to keep in mind, which is if now it's continues to fund this thing, is it getting more value than it's putting in? And I think the answer is pretty clear. And mind you, while that's fine and dandy, but as somebody who is in more or less a high risk business, right, and everybody else developing this thing is, ideally we want equity and to be able to capture big upside from this. And going the nouns route doesn't make sense either, because we're just getting nice salaries, but we're not getting the potential for what you would get in an equity-based business, right? So, I mentioned a bunch of things, but one is I think it is sustainable as it now sees it getting more value than it's putting in. And at even 1,000 ETH development costs per year, I think it's, at least to me, and then maybe I'll get pushback and people will think otherwise, but I think it makes sense. But there, I'm not getting, like, I'm putting a year, 2 years, 3 years worth of time where there's no way to get like sort of exit for what we built. Second one is the product fee. And then third and fourth and beyond is really just going experimental and maybe minting 100 NFTs that commemorate the provenance of Prop House, and then we share that with Nouns DAO, and then in that case, maybe those NFTs are worth a lot of money in 10 years' time if Prop House protocol becomes this huge thing, similar to how Xcopy can sell one of his things for 1,000 ETH. Like, maybe that's the case, but those are very experimental. So, I think so far it's a win-win relationship, and ideally with the community and big brains within crypto, we can find a way to solve some of these questions. Does that help, Joel?
Yeah, that's basically. I don't think I need answers to that, but in proposals, that's kind of the thought that I want to make sure that I'm tapping into. I got a dog wagging.
Oh shit! Yeah.
Like that. I think that's a key part of the proposal. Any proposal you put in right now is just making sure that conversation is continued to be included. And something I also would really like to see in the short term is if we can also maybe find some contributions from other people who are interested in funding public infrastructure. Like, for instance, with MeBits, like if we ever tapped into Yuga Labs in a larger way, there could be contributors at a large scale just at this early stage too.
Yeah, I think we've had some contributions already on the product side. What I will say with contributors is that across the board, from what I've seen from experience, and from working in public, the book I had to read twice to really grasp what they were saying is that in a lot of cases, this sort of kumbaya where a lot of people are contributing to your project, it just isn't the case. Like Ethers.js, WagMe, all these things are developed by 1 or 2 people. In our case, it's 4 or 5 people, right? The open source contributions in a lot of cases is just a few folks doing a lot of the 90% of the work, and then others maybe raising issues, and then the developer solving it, or every now and then opening up PR. But I'm sure you're familiar with this scenario where somebody opens a PR, and it's more work to just review the thing and make sure it makes sense for the code base than to actually get the thing that they're trying to build into the product. So while I am a fan of like this open source ethos, I've come to realize that some of what I thought was true before is just really not the case. That's proven by the research that the author in that book did, but more clearly, you just go to the open source libraries that you use and look at the contributors and see how many people contributed 80-20 or 90-10. It's really two folks. It's three folks. It's really not that many people.
I really agree with that with code contributions. I think specifically I meant like, can we find any funding partners who, for instance, would fund
Okay.
development costs or something?
Yeah, that might be the case. So another experimental approach to funding this whole thing, and maybe more so it's just a team, is having an out. So, and this goes for open source projects in general that we haven't seen yet, but I would love to see it, is if Ethers.js runs an Nounish DAO through Nounce Builder, right? Would people be contributing enough such that it makes sense for them to run the thing? And so in that case, if the Prop House team as an open source development team were to run this thing so that people can contribute, and basically that's our source of funding to continue to develop the protocol and the product, then maybe we could get people that are making use of this, Meebits and all the other DAOs that are making use of it, contribute such that it's not all on Nouns. That said, there's some issues with that. I won't go into it because it's not strictly true that while everything is open source, I think open source in that case makes a lot more sense for things that cannot capture value in any practical way, aka Ethers.js, WAGMI, those sort of tools. But the other thing I'd add to that is the fact that I do think that Nouns sort of being the Patreon of what we're doing here, the value that we're accruing in intangible, which is all that Nouns runs on, is very real. I've spoken to a lot of folks outside of the Nouns community, and to them, like, Prop House does add a ton of value to what Nouns is and what it means and what it feels like, right? And so if you can imagine, right, that Prop House becomes this like infrastructure layer where all these communities across the globe deploy capital, and Nouns is the one sort of maintaining that road for everybody, I think that intangible is worth a lot. And so back to my first point is, I do think Nouns is getting a lot of value from the stuff that we're doing, even though it's not strictly ROI. But then again, like, Nouns isn't based on strict ROI. It's based on attention, desirability, making sure that the meme is more or less impeccable. Yeah. Thanks for the question, Joe. I hope that at least I'm like sharing exactly what's going on through my mind when it comes to those things.
Seneca, I'm not sure how you are. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Joe.
That's perfect. Thank you for the time. It's interesting to hear these thoughts. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks for being here, and thanks for asking.
I'm not sure how you are for time, Seneca. There's 2 other small questions in the chat. Did you want to still take some more questions?
No, I'm good for as long as we need.
Okay, so Akva has asked, is there any chance that you will be integrating Prop House with Federation for on-chain voting by subDAOs?
I'm not familiar with what the technical side of that looks like, so I can't really answer. But I mean, given that the protocol is just the protocol. I can imagine this sort of thing being developed outside of the protocol, a layer above it. And if people find it useful, then they can use it, and that'd be that. For what it's worth, we've tried doing some delegation work, and I think Agora is maybe working on some sort of thing for this. But yeah, I think ultimately, like, if you build something that is useful for all parties involved, like, people will just use it. And so with Federation, if they make something that's useful, like, we'll be happy to integrate. There's really not much more to it. I hope that answers. Yeah, right. Thank you for asking, Akba.
Dan Azord asks, besides self-sustainability and trustlessness, are there any other goals the team envisions for Prop House long term?
Yeah, I mean, there's like the big, ambitious, dreamy goals of Prop House becoming the way to essentially deploy capital. So if you think of DAOs as the LLC for the next 5 decades or more, right? There's going to be a lot of deploying, and so if Prop House can capture any bit of that, that would be amazing. But I try not to like get too dreamy and think too far into the future. So goals for me really is making a product that is just fun and useful and enjoyable to use, right? I think that is what gets us to the dreamy state, right? Where we achieved all this, but that's really not done. At least how I see it, that's not really done reverse engineering any of this, because there's so much uncertainty down the line. Like, try to imagine what crypto looks like in 2 years. It's very hard. Never mind 5-10 years. So for me, my North Star is literally just work on the product, make sure it's useful, make sure everybody that is using it is getting a ton of value from it, and that will put us in a good spot. A lot of the work that I personally do is literally just talk to everybody who is using this thing and have ongoing conversations. Did they like it? Did they not? Are props good? Is the UX good? Like, very just, it almost sounds dumb, but yeah, I think to me that's my North Star, just focusing on what's here and now and making sure that it's fun to use. Thanks for the question, Danny. Anybody else? Any questions? Anything Prop House?
Nothing else in the chat at the moment.
All right. Well, if nobody else has questions, then I think we can end it here. It took an hour 5, which is pretty good.
There's a few people typing. They might just be saying goodbye. I don't know. But yep, just everybody saying I love Prop House. That's what I figured.
And we love Uptoshi, and now it's on the ground. And of course, like, I think it's pretty obvious, but 90% of the work on all this is CDT on the front end, DevCat on the back end. Charlie did the entire protocol on his own. Of course, he had some help from Babe as well, who's actively developing some other stuff, the Starknet relayer and whatnot, and the subgraphs. Toady on community with spaces and all that stuff. So yeah, most of it, I'm just the talking person here, the talking milk carton, but really it's all those folks that make this special. Oh, and of course, if it wasn't for OX like, Prop House would be really, really ugly. And shout out, of course, to Tosi who helped us in the first 6 months or so. So yeah, that's the game. And if nobody else has any questions, I think we can wrap it up there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Seneca.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you everybody for coming. And if you have any other questions, feel free to DM me, drop them in the chat. We'll talk there. Yeah. Cheers. Cheers, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.